here with Charlie Ruiz, not Ruiz. So you get that.
You got it. You got it.
Charlie Ruiz. How are you, man? I'm excited to get into this with you.
Appreciate you having me, man.
Yes,
Let's
sir.
do it.
Yes, sir. All right. So we connected. Yeah, we connected a couple weeks ago and kind of chatted a bit about just what we wanted to talk about. And I was explaining to you a little bit of the reason why I started this. And there's definitely some overlap, I think, between why or what you do and kind of why I started this. Right. So,
Yeah.
This will be great, man. So let's just talk a little bit about if you could, like your playing career, and not to go all the way back, but you played at Long Beach State University. So there's a pretty good list of big leaguers and like what Tulo, Longoria, Jared Duran, right? So I'll stop rambling now, but would love to hear like your experience there and prior to that, a little bit about your career.
Absolutely. I'll actually go prior. Funny enough, I'm wearing the hat, and then I'll go into Long Beach, just because the 2 years that I spent at the junior college, Chabot Junior College in Northern California, it's in Hayward. Those are the 2 years that kind of really set me on this trajectory of going, okay, wait a second, right? There's a lot more to the game of baseball here than just stepping on a mound and throwing as hard as you can. So I really equate the 2 years at Chabot as my two most transformational years. Both from the coaching staff, right, with Steve Friend, who was there for 30 years, and then my pitching coach, Will Tavis, and just a lot of the relationships and bonds of baseball and the mental game started there. So that when I then got to Long Beach State and I met Ken Revisa, and I'm walking into USC, and I'm on the mound at Blair Field with all of this history of the Tulos, the Jason Giambis, I'm like, oh, okay, right, this is a whole nother tier at the Division I level. But I had learned the fundamentals and what the hard work looked like at my junior college. So it was this cool intersection of like, okay, let me go ahead and apply all this stuff to being a dirtbag here. And it all just very much aligned with me then of the work ethic, the grind, the discipline, and the mental game, because it was already established at Long Beach State.
Sure. So you were pretty aware of the mental game at that time. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I was aware of it. And I still didn't know the intricacies of it until I got to Long Beach and was like, oh, this is a whole program that is bought into it. Where at Chabot was more, not subliminal, but it was more like individuals who were bought in, including the coaching staff. Long Beach State, it was like, this is the foundation of like what we do here.
Sure. So do you remember some times during your playing career when you were locked in mentally? And then, what did that feel like?
So do I remember times that when I was locked in at Long Beach, or just in general?
In general.
I'll give you a story at Long Beach State, just because it was one of the ones that stand out of being locked in. I think there's two parts. One, away, and then also a home game. I'll start with the away game because it was the first time I had got a chance to really pitch at this big level, because we're in the SEC. So we're playing South Carolina, right? South Carolina Gamecocks, brand new stadium, gorgeous, better than any field I've ever seen. And even to this day, including the minor leagues, like gorgeous stadium. And I'm still not established as a closer yet. I'm like maybe the 7th, 8th inning guy. They're kind of testing some guys. And in 2 days, South Carolina had hit 10 home runs. So at that time, they had Jackie Bradley Jr., this dude named D'Angelo Mack. These guys were just putting the ball out like crazy. And I came in with runners on 2nd and 3rd in an 8th inning, and I think in our second game. And my coach comes out, and at this point, he still wasn't letting me throw my split. And he comes out, he walks out, and he's like, hey, what do you want to do here? And I look at him, and I'm like, let me throw my split. Like, I know they haven't let me do it yet because it's our second series. Let me throw it. Bam, throw it, bounces. Strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. First guy strikes out. I struck out the side. I threw, I think, 10 splits. 10 out of 14 pitches were splits. And he was like, all right, okay, so we're going to go with this. Next game, same thing happens. And that was like the entry point of, like, when you think about being locked in, like that game, those two outings, big stage, 8,000 people yelling at you. Like they had hit 13 home runs at this point, and I'm like, give me the ball. Like, there's no other choice but to go attack these guys, these big SEC swingers. And that's where I kind of fell in love with the notion of, all right, like, to be able to be a closer at this level, you got to have the most conviction and the most confidence ever, no matter how many home runs this team's hit. Like, they're not going to hit that. So let them have it.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. Just as you were saying that, the word conviction was running through my mind. Like, because
Yes.
that's especially as a closer. I mean, you got to have conviction in whatever you're doing in life, but as a closer in the big leagues or at whatever level, like if you don't trust what you're doing, you're cooked.
Cooked is a good word. And here's the thing too, and a lot of my teammates will probably laugh and remember this, because it also comes down to the conviction and also the delivery of it. So again, whatever you're doing, business, professional, home, like, have conviction in doing it. And as long as you can have conviction, like, that's what we're looking for, because sometimes you still lose. I went 1-1 that year. I had one loss. So there's obviously, like, not the team, right? As a closer, I would rarely look at any of the stats. I didn't throw hard, so it didn't really matter. But of course, at the end of the year, you're like, oh, I had 1 win and 1 loss. And I'm like, oh, when did I lose? And then my friends and teammates always remind me. Conviction, I do the job. I go in. I'll never forget. Come in, Washington State. No, it wasn't Washington State. It was, I forgot who it was. But I get brought in, and runners on second and third. First guy gets walked. I come in. I strike out the first guy, second guy, third guy. But the catcher who was in, I hadn't worked with him that much. So here my job is to come in and get guys out. Split, pass ball, split, pass ball, 5 strikeouts, second runner scores, game over, we lose the game. So the joke was, hey, Charlie, do you remember when you struck out 4 guys and lost? Do you remember? I'm like, yeah. Because sometimes, regardless, you execute, you still might lose. What was within my control? I need to do what I need to do. I had to get guys out. I did my part. And at the same time, on the reverse end of it, like, that's not on my catcher at all. The guys would joke around and say it is. No, like, my responsibility, I'll take that. I wanted to make sure that guy did not feel bad, right? But guys are guys. They're going to be guys. Anyways, long-winded story of saying, no matter what, even if you do commit and convict and with conviction, you still might lose, and you got to be okay with that performance and take ownership of it, even if it wasn't your fault.
Yep. If your stuff wasn't so nasty, that wouldn't have happened. I don't know.
Oh man, I'll never forget that day.
That's funny. So,
Yep.
All right, man. So it's funny. Like, you try to fit so much stuff in 45 minutes.
I know, man.
but for you, yeah. So for you get drafted in the 10th round, right? And then you go play minor league ball for a few years. Mm-hmm. Maybe just that time period, if you could walk me through that. And then it was an injury that ultimately ended your career. So what's going on in your life at that point?
Yeah. So like after playing pro ball for a couple of years.
Yeah, sure. Yes. You play pro ball and then there's an injury, maybe just that latter part of the, yeah.
Yep. So living a dream, right? Like, you signed in the 10th round, 2009, never thought I'd be there. With the Rockies, I get sent to Tri-Cities, Washington. Here, I think I'm going to rain country, and it's the dry desert. And I'm in pro ball, right? I'm signing autographs. I'm closing ball games, right? I'm competing at the highest level, or I'm competing at a level that I never thought I'd be at, and enjoyed that season through and through. Great teammates, great bonding, great experience. Ended up having a great finish the month, finished the season, and then went home, came back, and returned that next spring training and was sent over to Asheville, North Carolina, where the short of it and the way I've told the story is, you do a pitch, felt funny, do another pitch, gave up some runs, thought it was a mental thing. You go from not giving him a run in 30 innings to giving up 9 runs in 3 innings, and you're like, oh well, maybe you're just being soft, or maybe you're throwing 82 miles an hour. And Jose Altuve is not going to swing at your split in the dirt. He's going to wait for your 82 mile an hour fastball and hit it over the fence. Got it. Once that realization came, and I talked to my teammate, my roommate, who was like, hey man, your fastball is coming in 83. Fast forward to 22 months, right? Shoulder surgery, labrum cuff, career over. Now you're 26. You're like, what do I do with my life? You go back to Long Beach State to get your degree so you can finish school and figure out now what. And that now what is a journey in itself. And that's something we've talked about, and probably something we're going to go into.
It sure will. So I think you started out in the sales world, right? I mean, what during that time period, because it's over, right? I mean, the baseball career is over. I've heard you tell the story about, you're playing, I think you were coaching right at one point, and then your dad. Yeah. So it's a terrible moment, right? But then you're like, all right, now we got to figure out what we're going to do. So what did you think you were going to do?
Yeah, Joe, thank you. And, terrible moment. While at the same time, also, I think we have to be able to accept. And it's the one thing that I will tell a former ball player, even to this day, like that was me closing my chapter without realizing I was closing the chapter. And yeah, my dad's in the stands, my friend's watching, and I'm at Chabot Junior College. My coach is watching. The guy who watched and coached me years ago, he knew I was done, but I had to close it myself. So like that was a moment where I'm like, all right, I'm still throwing 80, hug your dad, cry a little bit, and then go, well, now what? And I think that now what part was when I say like it was a moment I needed, I think it's a moment we all need. And it's to acknowledge it. Some people acknowledge it on a Facebook post, maybe a dinner, right? Maybe you have a party. You have these retirement parties. Well, imagine like at the end of your career, you give 20, 30 years and pour everything you can into a specific craft. And all of a sudden it's literally taken away from you. And you don't acknowledge that part of your journey. It's the same when it comes to being an athlete, or at least whether it's collegiate or professional. You may have given 20 years to something, like poured your heart into it, and you're not going to acknowledge it. Like give yourself some flowers for it, and then find a way to move on. Because if you don't, then 10, 15 years later, you're going to be forced into it because you haven't grappled with it. So I was more on like that. Let me grapple with this and handle this now. I'll figure out the job thing when I figure out the job. But right now, I got to sit with this and acknowledge my career and the highs and lows, whether it's writing it down or just thinking through it. And I had to spend some time doing that. And I don't think people like doing it because it's hard.
Yep. How long did you do that for? Before you're then like, all right, now let's go.
Well, again, in theory, Joe, it would have been a couple weeks.
Yeah.
However, it was while I was interviewing and not getting jobs for 6 months because I didn't know how to talk about myself, and because I was still probably holding on to stuff that I needed to think through or to process. So it took about 6 months of me going, all right, what do I do now? Interview, this job, talk to this guy, I don't know, maybe this teammate, to where then finally you walk into a startup in Silicon Valley and you botch another interview until that same gentleman looks at you who's interviewed all these other people and looks at your resume and says, hey, it says that you volunteered with the Colorado Rockies. He's like, did you play professional baseball? I'm like, yeah, I did, And then he's like, why would you not talk about that? I'm like, well, it's not really a job, right? Like, it's just I was playing a game. He was like, all right, look, we're going to bring back to the office. We're going to give you a contract for 3 months. As long as you're not crazy, like we'll give you a normal salary. But that's something that's so unique and so different. And the discipline and the rigor and the skills that you developed as a professional athlete is such a small percentage. Maybe you should talk about it more. Funny enough, I did a sales kickoff 3 weeks ago in Tampa. He was there. And he got to kind of see me in action leading a workshop on high performing teams, and was like, I can't believe what I'm watching. And I'm like, Yeah. Remember when you hired me because I had no idea what to say and talk about my transferable skills? And here I am leading a workshop for a sales team on transferable skills on team building and culture and high performing. Funny.
Yeah. Talk about full circle, huh?
Yeah. And then I finished that and went downstairs, and I had an hour doing a webinar for the Major League Baseball Players Association, quite literally identifying 3 skills for these former Major League Baseball players to then translate and tell a story about it to a potential future employer or when they're on stage,
Yep.
having just came from the offsite from the guy who hired me because I couldn't do what I was now teaching the Major League Baseball players to do.
So one thing that's awesome, by the way, one thing that's come up and that I just think about is that it's almost like if you're not 100% in on what you're doing, whether that's a player or a job, it's almost like your attention is going to be diverted elsewhere, right? So that's probably something. And I didn't play pro ball. I played college baseball, right? So, but it was a similar principle to where by the end I was kind of like, all right, let's start thinking about jobs. Let's start thinking about internships. And then once I started doing that, it was pretty much the end, right? So it's almost like you're walking a fine line a little bit.
Absolutely. I think it's shifted a bit
Uh huh.
because of, unfortunately / fortunately, depending on what camp you are on the whole NIL thing, right? Where whether it's recruiting or whether it's you as a player, you have to be thinking about, oh, what else can help this brand, this school get money, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird dynamic. But to your point of like walking the fine line, my take on it is everything around high performance is like teams, individuals, they know themselves. Like they're aware as an individual and as a team. Who are we? Who are we not? What is our identity? If I know myself, that fine line we talk about of how do I go all in and stay here focused on the current moment, and then also turn that off and think about like the business side of me or the brain side of me or whatever else I'm trying to position after sport. Now it's allowed. I always thought it was there, but people didn't talk about it. So the way I talk about it now is like, how can I be present while I'm here on the baseball field as a player, as a shortstop, as a center fielder, as a guy on the bench, as a member of the coaching staff? How can I be locked in and present right here? I can be 100% all in here for these 4 hours. Same way where, okay, now it's time for me to be locked in at school. You can be locked in there. There's not a one size fit all. I have to do everything all at the same time. Multitasking does not exist. But a lot of people aren't aware of how to turn down one thing or turn something else up based on where they're at. And that's a lot of the work that I do now with entrepreneurs, business executives. You can run a business and still go home and be a good dad.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a major league athlete, a collegiate baseball player, and still go home and be a good son. You can have the same type of commitment and rigor and discipline and focus. You don't have to just do one. That's part of what I talk about.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yep. Presence. I know. I had that jotted down as something to bring up to you. It's 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 easier said than done, though, right? I mean, like you're in class and your girlfriend just dumped you, and you're like, it's like there's outside things that can obviously
Noise.
impact you. What do you like? What practical tips maybe do you give to folks about staying present?
So, like, what tips or what skills or considerations when it comes to how to actually be present? This is where I can talk all day about this stuff, Joe. I think of it in 4 different ways, and I think presence gets it's a buzzword, right? It's like grit, presence. How can you make it actionable? I think one, you have to make it actionable for yourself and presence for yourself. And this kind of goes into my 4Cs method, right? Where it's like, how can I be present, right? Finding my breath, finding time to lock in and being aware of my environment, what serves me, what doesn't, to be able to observe in the moment. This is where meditation is. This is where some of the reflection, journaling comes in. Like, how can I be present in the current state of the moment? What am I feeling? What am I observing? Second one is like when I come to being present with my community, that's all around your actions around listening, right? Am I listening to understand, or am I listening to impress, right? How am I engaging properly, where I'm listening to tone, emotion, and all these other things when it comes to showing the other person that I'm here and locked in and present with them? Most people think they listen, they don't. And then when it comes to the craft, presence for your job, the craft, like variables of what it means. Your job right now, you probably know exactly where you need to be focused and locked in at. Who do you have supporting you on how to be present there? How are you limiting the distractions? If you're on a podcast, do you have all the tabs up? Are you creating presence zones where you know, hey, I need to really lock in, so I'm going to remove my environment from the busyness that's a coffee shop or my office. I'm going to go lock in at that corner, because I know when I lock in at that corner, that's a presence flow. It's a presence zone that I've set for myself at work to really focus on one or two things. So I think that when I look at presence as a whole, it starts with awareness, and then there's multiple different tools and skills to develop along the way.
Yeah. So almost reminds me of like Atomic Habits, which I read. I should probably read that, but yeah, it's like where your environment is so important, right? So if you have a certain place where you are super focused, or you almost have to have bumpers around where you're going to do certain things, and time blocks. That's something that I like have a whiteboard. I have all these things. I'm trying to get much better at it, because I get distracted. It's like the podcast, and then I have work, and then I have to try to be a good fiance, all this stuff. And when you try to do them all at once, it doesn't work out well.
And that's where it comes to awareness, right?
Yeah.
So like, and that's where being in Long Beach State, the godfather of sports psychology, Ken Ruiz, would always talk about, like, you can't be in control of your performance unless you're in control of yourself. And to be in control of yourself, it starts like with our actual mind. So be where you need to be when you need to be there. Like, what does that mean? Again, presence gets thrown out there. I mean, I've seen people on stages like Googling things, repeating messages from an Atomic Habits, or taking a post and just like regurgitating that as presence. That's fine, but it's got to be practical for you. Like you said, you know what presence means when you're with your fiance, or when you're with this person. Like, what is unique about that you can be aware of to rinse and repeat? So like individually, Joe, I think it's presence. What is my presence individually? And then the other part of it that I absolutely love is when people say, oh, they have presence. They've got executive presence. They've got a presence out there on the mound. To me, I think it can be taught. And that's a lot of the work that I do when it comes to storytelling, right? When it comes to being able to live that action out via voice or via your actions. They got a presence. It's how they walk into the room. It's their body language. It's the way they tell the story. It's their energy they bring. It's the words they're using. That's presence. That's executive presence from the external, people looking at you. I think it gets bubbled up when people say presence, they think yogi sitting, meditating. No. There's an executive presence that you bring to every part of your life too. And that's where I also like to nerd out. But
Yeah, love it. Yeah, that's awesome. So I just want to backtrack for 1 second, and then maybe loop back into that, because you said you think it can be taught.
mm-hmm.
Do you know it can be taught just from your experience? Yeah, like have you? I mean, that's what you do these days with CLR Connection. Yeah, so I was going to backtrack, and then we just jump right back into that. But
all right, anyway, you want to backtrack first, or what?
No, go there first, and then we'll take it back.
Can it be taught? Short answer, yes. If the person is okay with getting uncomfortable to find it. So like a blanket term, 2 that get thrown out: authenticity, presence. Authenticity can sometimes be a mask, right? How do you be authentic if you can't be real? Well, you might be fighting something that you got to get through. So you can allow someone to kind of coach and pull that out of you. Hopefully someone like myself. To be honest, to be upfront, to handle whatever we need to handle, to then say, okay, this is the real me. And regardless of what stage I'm stepping on or what room I'm into or what leadership position I'm going to walk into, I'm going to be okay with being myself, my full self, because I've done the work to understand like this is me in my core. And then when it comes down to actually helping them deliver that message, I was fortunate to work at a communications firm where I'd go in and out of Silicon Valley, working with leaders, teams. We're talking thousands of people on how to refine and tell their story. And I kind of would identify and watch the people who are really good and then coach them live in trainings. Like, oh, like this is how you can be more crisp. This is where the tone can get better. This is how you walk into the room. And then I'm in my head going, wait a second. This is the same stuff that I'd watch on and off the field, in and out of the locker room. Then I started to merge my worlds of speaking maybe in the communication space to like speaking and leading in teams. And I'm like, oh, the sport of speaking, that in itself is how I train people with presence. How are you mentally preparing before you show up? What type of body language are you coming in with? The game starts before the game. The game starts the day before. Preparation, huge part of presence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you know. You go back to back. When you walk in, your presence in meeting 5 is probably not going to be the same thing it was in meeting 1. Great. What skill, what routine do we need to implement for Joe so that he walks in on meeting 6 and he's locked in and present and presenting in that way with conviction and confidence the same way he was on meeting 1? That's a sport. There's so many variables that you got to be aware of. So can it be taught? Yes.
Yep.
Is the person willing to be uncomfortable in identifying what their story is and then how to tell that and to walk it and to do the thing? That's another question.
Yeah. So that's exactly then you pretty much brought that exactly to where I was going to go, because it's a sport, like translating whatever those skills were from being an athlete, right? It's almost like you can make it into a game or gamify it is a term that I've heard just with a career, right? And then you talk, what I was going to mention is that you say it's not about helping athletes like get a job and actually transition. So it pretty much speaks into exactly what you're saying. It's about sustaining the performance after that. So that's great. You get a job, but then what are you doing after that? Right.
Yeah. That's the question to be answered. And it's not, at least in my opinion, yet. I think a lot of
with athletes specifically, is that what you're
with former athletes that find themselves into jobs?
Sure.
I think there's amazing programs out there that can help you get skills, understand like nuances around the job market, writing on LinkedIn, getting a chance to be able to tell your story a bit, right? I do some of that, but it's less about the career change. There's so many people that can do that. Career to job. Great. They land the job. I think most athletes, former athletes that find themselves into life beyond sport in their next job, they need more coaching and more development once they land. So it's not 0 to 1, it's years 2 to 7. Great, now I'm on a new team. They just came from a world where they may have had 5 coaches constantly on them. Constant competition of teammates pushing them. They're a part of a team aligned with a mission. They go from that environment to joining some small startup where they're not getting coached or managed, where they don't connect and have anything aligned or anything in common with anybody else they're working with. No surprise they end up quitting or leaving the job 6 months to a year and going back to coach because they missed that environment. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm like, wait a second, let me take that young sales guy, product guy, gal, wherever they're at in years 2 to 5 and remind them who the hell they were on the field, in the pool, on the court. And all of a sudden they get unlocked and they're like, oh, no wonder why there's a fast track. No wonder why 95% of CEOs former collegiate athletes. They found their unlock. It's not about just the transition. It's about the development.
So it's basically like they're stuck in a sense, like they're stuck at. What does that look like? Because that's something you face yourself, right?
So then, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. Because I feel like some people, probably explain myself in a lot of these things, right? Because this is it's probably what I'm going through a little bit. Is just like, dude, you've done it before, but then how do you keep it? You can, and you show flashes of it, but how do you be consistent and stick with that, right?
What does it look like? And then how do you actually take it and move it, right? How do you actually like reenact or recreate it? I've been really into this notion of reinvention, and because athletes get it. I tell a story, right? Working with somebody, I was asking somebody, I was like, hey, do you know who Vince Carter is? Yeah, he's the guy who shoots threes, right? So back when I was a huge Vince Carter fan in the Kobe Bryant, Allen Iverson era, Vince Carter was my favorite player, and he was the person who would dunk all over everybody. Vince Carter was known for being a dunker. Vince Carter played for almost 20 years, if not 20 years plus. He reinvented himself because he had to and became, 6th all-time in shooting three-pointers? People don't know that. An athlete understands the benefit of reinventing themselves for the greater good of the team and for the greater good of themselves. So what does it feel like? When I'm in a role and I'm stagnant and I'm not reinventing myself and I'm bored, I'm trying to grow, but I have nobody else trying to help me grow. That would never be allowed on a baseball field. So then it's up to the ownership of you, of the athlete, of the person, of the employee, to find a way to go get support, to go find a new starting five, to go push themselves into the next phase of getting uncomfortable again. I was in a space where I was not getting coached. I was bored. I wasn't aligned to mission. I was trying to find myself in the sales world, but I didn't have it. But I also had to take ownership and go, it's your responsibility to go make a change. So I do. It took 7.5 years, tough conversations, and I've taken a $60,000 pay cut, which people in the Bay Area think you're crazy, but then you do it and you find it and you're like, wait a second. Oh, this is it. I'm gonna go find it. I'm gonna go make it happen, because now I found it again. I found me being on stage again. I found me being on the mound again. And that's what I found.
And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing now. I mean, and that's you founded your company. So I wanted to ask you, by the way, I did not know that Vince Carter was 6th all time in threes.
Something like that probably changed.
All right, whatever. Yeah. But I didn't know that he ever shot 3-pointers, by the way. I just remember him winning dunk contests. So,
right.
But taking the leap to entrepreneurship, what did that look like for you? I mean, because there's a lot of uncertainty in that as well.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Rocky.
Mm-hmm.
And also unconventional. I never thought I'd do it. So it was a risk. I still find myself wondering, like, I can't believe I'm here 3.5 years later. But it was something that I knew in my body that, like, I had to get uncomfortable again. And I found myself being stagnant, complacent, and not around people that I really thought were going to push me out into that zone of what I could go do. And thankfully, I had some mentors along the way who encouraged me to say, hey, take ownership, put you in front of the line. What does Charlie want? And you have conversations with your home. You're raising children, and you're like, what is the thing I want them to look up and be like, man, Daddy took the reins and he's doing life the way he wants to do it. And going back to what we shared earlier, he's playing his own game. And a lot of what I emphasize with people isn't gamifying a product or a solution, which is very buzzwordy in the product space. Let's gamify it. How about you gamify yourself? How about you figure out how to gamify the way in which you're playing your game. That's the core of what I like to help people do. And most of the time, it doesn't come externally, it starts internally.
Yeah, man. I know the word gamify. It's I don't know why I even used that word before.
It's a word,
but it's true. Yeah, but it the way that you talk about that though, it is all internal, and I think I don't know. There's so much like self-help type of stuff out there, but it's I don't know, like because especially when I was in college, if I would have thought that I was ever having these conversations when I was in college, would have been like, there's no chance. Not thinking about, I always wanted to get better at baseball and that kind of stuff, but any of maybe the questions that I'm curious about now, and a lot of the questions that you answer for people, it's just interesting how it's kind of an evolution, right? And then kind of hopefully getting not back, because it's not like I'm not there now, but getting to a spot where I don't know, where it feels like you're doing the right thing. Not that there is a right thing, but right thing for you, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, right.
So anyway,
You nailed it, Joe. It's finding the right thing for you. And a lot of the times what happens is people will find and they'll search for what's next. No, find out what's not next. But be aware enough to understand, how is this in service of you? How is it in service of your growth? How is it in service of your family, of your people, of what matters to you? And by naturally doing that and being aware enough, the things will illuminate in front of you if you are present and aware with that. And the people, I lost a lot in the last year and a half, business-wise, relationship-wise. It was all for me to put me in a space of right now of what I'm about to embark on. I learned what I didn't want, what I don't need, but I'm not going to be okay with. That is allowing me to have way more conviction now into everything that I'm doing. Tying it back to baseball real quick. Hell no, I ain't throwing that curveball. I'm sure as hell not throwing a changeup. I'm either throwing a fastball outside or I'm throwing a split. That's what I'm throwing. I don't need the other stuff. Last year and a half, I've been told I need all this other stuff. No, I need to focus on what's in front of me and lean into where I feel like my power is. Thus, gamifying my own life my way and playing it in the way in which I want to play it with the people I want to play it with. And you can do that at a company too. You just got to find out what you don't want. So you find out what you do want, and then you lock in on that.
Well, that's a pretty good place to leave off, I think. Charlie, that's cool. That's cool, man. We started with the splitter and the conviction, and then we ended with it. Well, listen, man, thanks. This was that's good. You did you're good. I know you did that on purpose, but
thank you.
So
Joe.
All right, man. Yeah, thanks. This is cool. I know, happy that I came across you, whether it be on LinkedIn or just listening on a few other podcasts and whatnot. But where can folks find you, if you could mention that real quick?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Feel conversation like we're hanging out in the locker room. Mm-hmm. And so website, clrconnection.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and my Instagram is just my name, Charles L. Ruiz. But again, reach out, say hello, and thank you for the space and for the platform, man. It was fun.
Love it. All right, man. We'll have to do this again. We'll do a part two.